All right, we have an awesome episode of the podcast today. I'm here with my good friend and also someone who I've worked with personally. He's a partner in SaaS Academy. He's the CEO of GSD Coach Recruiting, helps people find world-class sales talent. He's one of the best sales recruiters I've ever seen in the game. Travis Janko, welcome to the podcast, man.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, it's awesome
Great to be here.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you. It's awesome to have you. So, I want to take it back for a minute.
Sure.
I want to know one thing. What's the first sale you made in your life?
First sale I made, probably not what most people would think. Actually, my first sales job was selling vacuum cleaners door to door.
Vacuum cleaners door to door.
Vacuum cleaners door to door. I was absolutely terrible. Literally, I was so bad that, and I was poor. So I had people literally driving me around, dropping me off, and so I could knock on doors until I could sell something.
Did you have to bring a vacuum?
Yeah. It was a heavy one. So basically, my first sale, after 3 weeks of completely failing, a trainer went with me. Halfway through, literally grabbed me and said, "Shut up," and he closed the deal. So that was my first sale.
So what's the backstory behind that? What were you saying that you shouldn't have been saying? What was going on?
I was trying to tell them every feature and benefit that the whole thing had versus finding out if they even I was terrible.
Yeah. But we see SaaS founders do that too, right? They go through every single feature in the whole thing instead of just, do you have a problem I can solve? Let me go show you how I can solve it. Damn, that's fascinating. It's funny because I've never worked as a salesperson. I've been a founder, which I think is the same thing in a lot of ways. But, I always hear salespeople say that the people who have done door-to-door sales are a different breed of salesperson versus the people who have only done sales in the internet era. Is that something you agree with?
Oh, yeah. It's door-to-door sales is a lot different. People get afraid of picking up the phone. Imagine having farmers let dogs out the door chasing you when you're trying to knock on their door and
with a vacuum.
Yeah. Having people show you that they have a gun when you're at the door,
Yeah.
all those type of things. Yeah. So totally different situation.
Man. And so I don't want to leave on a cliffhanger on the door-to-door vacuum sales. How did that end up working out? And as your first foray into sales, you closed a deal or two, but what was the trajectory?
So really good. After I watched the trainer, I basically just begged him, let me shadow you for a week. And I shadowed him for a week. He followed me around. He taught me. I figured it out. Finally got a sale on my own after about 4 or 5 weeks. And I made more money than I could imagine at that point.
Yeah.
This was so many years ago. I got really, really good at it. Became the number one salesperson, and 6 months later was promoted to sales manager, which all sounds awesome. And I was a terrible sales manager.
Really?
Yes.
So walk us through then. What made you a good rep but a bad manager?
So I had a process I followed as a rep, and I just rinse and repeat, just like in sports, right? It's the same thing. You just keep following that process that works. As a manager, though, I thought all I need to do is tell everybody to do exactly what I do, exactly the way that I do it, which doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And nobody had taught me that you need to learn your people. You need to understand their motivation. I just assumed that you tell people what to do, and that doesn't work really great with new salespeople.
All right, so I have a couple of questions on this. Before I dive into them, I just want to say this for the people listening, that I promise you we're not going to do a podcast about vacuum sales, but it's an incredible backstory. So you know who this guy is. Travis, you were a sales director at a company that went on to get acquired for 10 figures, then a sales director at a company that went on to get acquired for 9 figures. You've come a long way from dragging a vacuum down the street, throwing it at a dog, which is awesome. But man, the mindset that it takes to survive in that environment, or really any sales environment, is fascinating. So, when you said that you became a sales manager and the biggest lesson that you learned was that you needed to learn your people, I imagine that starts with mindset. So my question is, what type of mindset do you have to be? Try that again. What type of mindset do you have to have in order to be a world-class salesperson?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that go into that. I think that the biggest thing is you have to understand winning. And some of the best salespeople I've ever worked with have been winning athletes because they're, again, like I said, it's rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
But you also have to understand what it is to lose and that that's okay. So if you've ever seen somebody who is, think back to high school and you have somebody that lost their first wrestling match after 4 years and they freaked out. They didn't know what to do because they hadn't learned that sometimes you're going to lose. It just happens. So I think that the mindset of a salesperson is you have to think about winning. You also have to think about process, but you also have to know that you're going to get more losses than wins. That's just what it is.
But how do you keep a healthy mindset when you're getting rejected 70% of the time, and that's a good number for most sales reps, or 80% or 90% of the time? How do you stay in the game?
It's a lot of self-motivation, hanging around the right people that are going to point you in the right direction, but also knowing the big thing is if you know your data and you know your numbers and you know if I do this, I'm going to get here.
Yeah.
So just knowing literally at the end of the month, if as a salesperson, my goal is 10 sales, if I know what I need to do to get to 10 sales, then I just need to go do those things. And I know that there's going to be some tough things that are going to happen along the way. There's going to be wins along the way. Mm-hmm. The thing for new salespeople is they celebrate way too soon when they think they have a win and when they don't, and then they get that loss. Somebody says, I'm going to do it. Call me back next week. And they chalk it up. They're high-fiving everybody, and then next week never happens, and then they get really down on themselves. So it's just about knowing some of those things are going to happen.
That's interesting. I've had to tell multiple salespeople over my time in tech that it doesn't count until the credit card gets processed, right? Yep. Until the money's in the bank, you have not made a sale. They can say whatever they want, but it's not until it's in. That's interesting.
I've had that conversation thousands of times.
I bet you have, man. I bet. Cool. So let's talk tech for a minute now, right? So you were the sales director at Trulia that got acquired by Zillow for, I don't know, $3 billion, a little bit more than that, right? How did you, before we talk about the acquisition, which I think everyone's gonna be super interested in, but how did you come into that position? How did you get the job? What was that like? And how big was Trulia at that point?
So Trulia was really when you think of startup and you hear about the Wild West startup, that's what Trulia was when I started. I was the 35th employee in the Denver office. I had never worked in a startup. So I went from vacuum cleaner sales into corporate sales.
I figure there was a couple steps in between vacuums and sales director at Trulia.
Vacuum to car sales to digital marketing sales.
Got it.
On and on. And then we moved to Denver. I applied at Trulia. The interview process was crazy.
Really?
Today, the interview process has to move fast. Back then, nothing moved fast. So I started there. Like to kind of take a side note. When I started, 1 week out of training, just product training, I didn't even have all the product down yet. And my my director called me in and said, hey, we need to have a conversation. You're going to start with your team tomorrow. I'm like, cool, I'm not ready, but let's do it.
Yeah.
And she said, also, they're the monkey in the middle. And I said, what is that? She said, they only hit 35% to quota last month. So we put them in the middle of the room so everybody could see who was the worst team. So this is pretty scary.
Yeah.
Oh, also, they loved their manager who we just fired, and 2 of them applied for your job and didn't get it. Go get them.
Wow. Sounds like you were really set up to win.
I was not set up to win. It was pretty tough. The first few days were really rough.
Yeah.
I would come into the room and talk to the team, and here's what I would get. And nothing. The 2 people who had applied for my job were the ringleaders. So it took a bit. I won them over, just started figuring out what their motivations were. How can I help you get there? What you should know is that there was no process. Mm-hmm. Everybody did everything. So new business, you do that. Upsell, you do that. Retention, you do that.
Wow.
Customer success, you do that. That's what this. So it was. You think of how we teach process. There was no process. It was literally the Wild West. Our team was terrible. Nobody on the team had hit quota in 3 months, and they hit 35%. So what I did is. Well, I tried to talk with all the other leaders and all the other directors, and again, I was the new guy.
Yeah.
So what I did is I found the top 2 salespeople. I just looked through Salesforce. I found who the top 2 salespeople in the company were. by far the top 2 salespeople, and I shadowed them for 2 weeks, early in the morning, late at night, anything that I could do. And I figured out their process. I figured out what they were doing. Then I also realized that there was a way to game the system a bit. So you had a quota based off of new business. You also had a quota based off of upsell. You had a quota based off of retention. And they wanted you to do all 3 of those things. I just figured out who on the team was really good at each of those. And I figured if you can just hit 300% to this thing, you don't need to worry about those 2 things.
Wow. So you split the book essentially between your people.
Yep. And I used the process that I had built, or that I had learned. I found the 2 worst people on the team who wanted to learn, sat them right next to me, and literally I listened to every single call, and I just typed telling them what to say until we figured it out.
Wow.
I mean, there was a lot more to the leadership than that.
Sure.
But that was the basics. You can fast forward about 4 months after that, we were 360% to quota. And I almost got written up because we weren't following process. So if you can think about how crazy that is.
Yeah. So how many different sales teams were you? Like how many peers did you have?
When I started, there were 3 other teams.
Okay.
And again, my team. When I left, so we had 35 people. When I left, there were 600 people in the building.
Wow.
Literally in the building, we just kept taking over other offices. There was no room for interviews, so we built tents, like little.
Come on, you were interviewing in tents?
In tents, yeah.
That's wild.
Oh yeah, it was pretty cool.
That's crazy. And so, okay, so you took this underperforming team, you came in, they didn't really like you not because of your fault, because of the circumstances.
Yeah.
And your process, I'm just reading this back to make sure I understand. Your process was, I think there's greatness somewhere in this building. It's just not in my little pod, but let me go find it, figure out what good looks like. And then you reverse engineered how to take that into your team. That was like principle number 1 is figure out what good looks like and pattern match against it. And principle number 2 is that you had a group of people who were all doing 3 different jobs, and you figured out it was probably better to let them specialize in different types of jobs. So you reallocated the work. And I think the reason I want to call that out is because I think that, like, when I look back in my first company, I didn't know any of this stuff, and I didn't understand why any company on earth would have a setter versus a closer, or an SDR versus an account executive, or whatever terminology you want to use. I didn't grasp the difference in the different components of the job, and so I think that's really important that a company at that size, right? Generalists may not win all the time, right? And there's probably opportunity in the specialization. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, 100%. And that's what we did. We literally split our team, and there was 9 people. We had 3 people who did this thing. They all sat together. It was like I was coaching 3 different teams.
Yeah.
And we still hit the numbers we were expected to hit overall because these people were just focusing on that one thing.
Yeah.
We broke quota multiple times. They kept changing it. You hear those stories all the time.
Yeah.
It happens.
That's cool. That's probably a pride point for you as a boss, though, right? Is that we broke the comp plan because we did too well.
It is. It's one of those conversations you have with your team. Hey guys, we're having an all hands. Just don't say anything. We know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
We already know they're going to tell us that it's going to be a 16-page deck telling us why we're winning because the quota just got tripled.
Yeah.
Don't say anything. Just smile and nod. We'll figure it out.
We'll go get it. Yeah.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And that was about every quarter.
That's wild. And so what year did you come in, and what year were they acquired by Zillow?
So I came in 3 years before they were acquired.
Got it.
Again, we had 35 people. We went from 35 people to 600 people in 3 years. We acquired 2 companies. We went IPO, and we made a lot of mistakes along the way. Our big win, though, was specialization. Like, that was the big thing, is by the time I left, there was a team for everything that happened versus everybody doing all the things.
Yeah. That's interesting. So they pattern matched kind of what you implemented in your pod in the early days.
Yeah.
What was I think for a lot of people listening to this, most of the people who listen to this are SaaS founders or aspiring SaaS founders, right? There's always a lot of curiosity around acquisition stories, right? I know you obviously weren't the founder of Trulia, but you had a front row seat as a director into this whole process of how a company like that gets swallowed up by a massive company like Zillow. What was that like for you guys?
It was a battle. So to put it bluntly, Trulia hated Zillow and Zillow hated Trulia. Not like a friendly thing.
Yeah.
Like, we will never buy them and we will never sell to them. We hate them. They suck. What they do is bad. That type, like, literally,
Wow.
you have to drink the Kool-Aid and believe that what you're doing is great and what they're doing is bad, when in all reality, we were selling to the same audience and
Yeah.
a similar product. And so it was one of those things where we weren't going to get acquired, but we wanted to win. And so what we decided to do is, we were number 3 in the space. So we purchased number 2 and number 4, and we became number 1 in the space, just barely ahead of Zillow. And that's what kind of caused this thing. And
Oh, so those 2 acquisitions were before the Zillow acquisition.
yes,
I got you.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And then we suddenly had a meeting and everybody's like, they just said, we are selling to Zillow. And everybody's jaws dropped to like, we thought it was a joke.
So you guys had no idea.
No, we had no idea this was happening behind the scenes. I mean, my director had no idea that this was happening behind the scenes.
That's bonkers.
When we found it out, though, is there's a lot of cool stuff that happened, and then you hear all of the bad stories about what happens with acquisitions. Those things happen too, because you can't have so many leaders, so you have to decide who's bringing who in and who's going. I rode the wave pretty well and jumped out right at the right time.
Yeah.
Cashed out and went into the next.
That's wild. What did you have to manage? Like, let me ask that differently. What was your team experiencing when they realized that their company was getting sold to their biggest competitor?
The hardest thing was we were all under NDAs and we couldn't say anything, which is almost impossible to go tell a sales team, stop texting everybody.
Tell a salesperson to stop talking. Let's see how that goes. Right?
Yeah, that was a big thing. The other thing was the fear. What's going to happen to me? What about me? What should I do? And I had to let everybody know that this is a thing that's going to happen at some point. But today we have a job to do, and tomorrow we have a job to do. And if we want to hit our commissions, we just need to buckle down and do our thing.
Yeah.
I always teach, have always taught and still teach, focus on what you can control. You know, leave the noise behind. If you can't control the noise, if you can, go fix it. If you can't, leave it behind and just focus on what's in front of you. Like that horse with blinders, kind of. Yeah.
So you just kept them focused on the mission, and
Kept them
it went
focused.
how it went.
Yeah, and we just kept winning.
And how did it go?
It went well. A lot of people left right before, just because of fear. A lot of fear of what if, and all of those things. But it was awesome. I'm glad I was part of it, for sure.
Yeah. Do you think?
Unfortunately, that was my first startup.
Okay.
So I thought, this must be what it's like. You know, you just cash out and buy a house. Cool.
Yeah. Do you think it was a good acquisition for Zillow?
Yeah, I think it was. What they were able to do is think of all the clients. Now, they Trulia and Zillow sell to real estate agents and brokers. So think of all the clients that Zillow didn't have because Trulia had them, and vice versa. And so now they were able to bring this set of clients and this set of clients together, and now you have other products and other things that you can sell to all of them. So I'm sure it was good for them.
Yeah. Interesting. Cool. So you rode the wave for a while. You stuck with Zillow for a while. Eventually you stepped off of that, and then you went to 5 Stars, which also got acquired for a huge sum of money, $330 million, I think it was, or something to that effect.
Right in that area, yeah. By sum up.
How was that different from your kind of first act in startup land?
Yeah. So my first act in startup land, I had never been taught as a sales leader that there's a process to leading people. I had always done it, but I didn't really realize that. And I never really realized you have to be a project manager as a sales leader, because in a large corporate company, there's a person that does the thing for you. And in a startup, you're the person that does the thing.
Yeah.
So when I came into Trulia and I asked my leader, hey, who builds these decks for me? And she laughed and she's like, that's you. Yeah. But they did have processes. When I left, everything was flowing. It was smooth sailing. They got rid of some of the basketball tables and ping pong tables and kegs and stuff like that. Yeah. Went from wearing shorts and t-shirts to dress shirts and ties and back down and all around. then I went to 5-Stars, and 5-Stars was a very, very small customer loyalty company. They had 3 inside salespeople in a loft in San Francisco taking inbound calls, and they had outside sales team, and that was it. And the goal was, how can we build a large outbound sales team in Denver? So day one, literally day one, the power was out. I was building IKEA desks with a flashlight, closing deals on my cell phone. And fast forward, we ended up having about 130 people in a year and a half in the office. No processes. That's not true. There were processes. There were processes that were probably outdated and not processes for a small outbound startup. Again, culture was such a big thing. They were really worried about, let's hire a bunch of cool people. And I just wanted to hire a bunch of people that could sell.
Yeah.
So that's a whole nother story, and one of the reasons why I got into recruiting. We'll probably get to that later, but the rapid growth at Trulia and at 5-Stars is really what got me to become a recruiter in the first place. But it was a wild ride. We knew if we got our $50 million Series C, we were all going to succeed, and if we didn't, then we probably wouldn't have a job. Yeah. And so it was those last 2 months before the Series C that there wasn't much sleep.
Sure.
I mean, literally 7 days a week, we just had a grill at the office, and everybody came in. It was just expected.
Man, what the part of this that's confusing to me is I feel like with a venture-backed startup, especially one that's going for a Series C and it's a make or break kind of thing, it sounds like you were saying you had to convince people to hire on proficiency instead of culture. Like, that feels so backwards to me. Can you describe what you were going through?
It was way backwards. It was really important that you hire the right type of person who fits the community, which is important. You should do that when you're hiring anyway. You should think about, what are our core values, and does this person match those? Like, they had a policy, we don't hire assholes.
It's a great policy, honestly.
It is a great policy. But behind the scenes, the policy was also, we hire really cool, nice people. And sometimes really cool, nice people might not be great salespeople. Yeah. And so it was a matter of trying to convince everybody that we can hire really cool people who are winners, who can also sell, who can help get us to the next level, because winners are going to bring on winners. Yeah. And mediocre people are going to, if you have a room of 8 mediocre people and 1 successful person, eventually that successful person doesn't want to be in that room anymore. Yeah. Because they're either going to be down to that level or they're carrying all the weight. But if you have a room full of 9 successful people, they're all bouncing off of each other and figuring out, how can we make each other better? Yeah. So what I did is I convinced them to fire the 3 recruiting firms that we had hired. And I convinced them to let me take care of it. And so I would get up at 3 a.m. every morning and I would source candidates, and I would set up interviews with them. And I was interviewing people I wanted to talk to instead of people I didn't want to talk to. Same at Trulia. I was interviewing 5 hours a day, every day, people I didn't want to hire, but I had to, because we had quotas, which is how I learned to become a recruiter. I either had to deal with it, or I learned how to go source candidates. And so of those 600 people, I probably sourced about 250 of them myself. And of our 125 people at 5-Stars, I probably sourced all but 10, the first 10. Yeah. And most of those came from Trulia, and that's another story, but I got in a lot of trouble for that. So
yeah. I mean, it's a universal truth of business, though. I mean, good leaders bring teams along with them. But you describe something. Netflix calls it talent density, right? And and they have this principle of every hire should raise the overall the average talent density in the room. And it sounds like that's what you were optimizing for when you're talking about the room full of A players, B players kind of thing. Yeah, it's super important. All right, so I'm a little bit mind blown right now that you, as a sales director, before you were a recruiter, sourced and hired literal hundreds of people, because it seems like you were doing the job of the people team and the sales director team, kind of handing off to yourself. And so I guess that is a natural transition into doing recruiting for a living, since you obviously got a knack for it and enjoy it. But how did you make that official, right? So I guess you stepped off of 5 stars after the acquisition. But what made you want to go do this professionally?
Yeah, it's a great question. And to step back, when I was at Trulia, I talked to the recruiting department, and they had a good recruiting department multiple times. This is who I want to talk to. I don't want to talk to anybody but this person, and they couldn't do that. So I spent 4 months talking to the top recruiters, watching videos, reading books, rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
And that's how I got to there. So when I left 5 stars, I worked for another small startup. So I did it backwards. I went win-win. It's not on my LinkedIn profile. Nobody's ever going to hear the name. Nightmares still happen.
Yeah.
Usually it happens the other way around.
Sure.
But while I was working for them and helping them, I started coaching and mentoring small SaaS founders over the weekends, in the evenings. It's kind of a passion, and I could make a little side money on it. And one day I was driving home after helping these people kind of build the business. We built the processes. I went in and helped close deals for them, taught them how to do it, and they asked me to hire a couple salespeople for them. And I did. And I was driving home, and I thought, I could have charged them for that. They would have probably paid me. Probably. And that's kind of where the aha moment.
Yeah.
And so I did it slowly, Matt. I was working full time for someone. I also had 2 clients who I was helping build out their business. And then my other full-time job on the side that nobody knew about was I was doing recruiting. And I just did that until it got to a point where I couldn't afford to work for this company any longer. It was one of those things. I'm not happy. They love shiny objects. They don't follow process. I'm here a lot. I'm helping them make a lot of money, but I'm actually making more with my side hustle that I enjoy more.
Yeah.
So that was kind of that. The big win was the transition was right before COVID. The big loss is that the transition was right before COVID.
Yeah.
So I went from having my best month ever in business. February was our best month ever for my recruiting business, best month ever for the company. In March, I didn't have a job and I didn't have any clients. So yeah, I had to refigure it all out.
Yeah. What did you do in that point?
I pouted for like a day and then decided to suck it up and figure it out. So I went back to all of my old recruiting clients, and I figured nobody in the world is hiring right now because we don't know what's happening. But they all have sales teams. So they probably are going to need help making sure their sales teams can navigate the waters. So I went back to coaching. I went back to, I became like, it wasn't a thing at the time, but it's called a fractional VP of sales now. So I just became fractional VP of sales for multiple of my clients and kept doing that and navigated until it was okay, till you could actually hire again.
That's interesting. That's why the company's GSD Coach first, because that's where it started probably, yeah?
It started several years ago from a company way back in Iowa before I was in startups. There was a round table with the top people in the company and the VP of sales. And the last question was, and there was 2 of my people in the round table, how would you describe your leader in 3 words or less? And they both like literally in unison said he gets shit done.
Yeah.
And so he came up and he says, these guys said you get shit done. You should just name your team GSD. So all of my teams were named GSD after that. And because I'm a coach, it just naturally was GSD Coach.
I mean, it's impossible not to notice hearing your story, right? I mean, you're the guy that got up at 3 o'clock in the morning to source candidates because the people you're getting handed weren't good enough, and still running a sales team and hired 300 people. So yeah, I'm pretty sure you get shit done.
Yes.
It's impressive. All right, so now I want to go down the recruitment rabbit hole for a minute, because if I'm in the shoes of whoever's listening to this particular podcast, you're in one of a couple of categories. You're a founder who needs to figure out how to be a salesperson because you're super early. You're a founder who's hiring salespeople. You're a founder who might need to hire a sales director, or you're a sales director who needs to hire salespeople. The point I'm saying is that there's no world in which being good at sales and being able to find great sales talent isn't an ingredient, regardless of what stage you're at. Everything comes back to sales. That's just the reality.
It does, yep.
I've had a front row seat to this because I've worked with you personally and I've seen how you interview people. But what I'd love to spend a minute or two on is I feel like you've got a very unique interview style and like vetting approach when you interview sales reps as a recruiter. Can you break down how you make sure they're legit in your conversations?
Yeah. and this, I think this is really important because I have this conversation all the time with founders who say, man, we've missed, like we've tried this. We've tried to hire people and they didn't make it. They weren't successful. We hired the wrong person. I think that the first thing is you have to be able to know who you need to hire. So before we even get to how do you break it down, you have to understand. So for instance, if you're an SMB, so a very transactional $700 a month company, you don't want to, and you have no sales team, you don't want to hire an enterprise salesperson from Salesforce.
Yeah.
They won't go together. There's going to be a lot of breaks. But so assuming you have the right type of qualified person you're talking to, then we have to assume that salespeople like to embellish a little bit, and sometimes they like to inflate their numbers. I'm a huge fan. If they can't prove their process and they can't prove their numbers, then they aren't moving on. Plain and simple. I'll give them a chance if they make a mistake. But what I basically do, Matt, is early on in the conversation, and by the way, I already know their numbers because I've looked at LinkedIn, I've looked at their resume, and if they don't have winning numbers on their resume, they've either been at their job for 8 years and they aren't looking for something, or they're probably not successful because the best salespeople put their winning numbers everywhere. I mean, that's what you do.
Yeah.
Even if you don't put it on LinkedIn, it's on your resume. So I have already written down all their data points that they have on there, if they have them. Then I'm going to ask multiple questions. One of them early on is, what was your quota? And then I'm going to talk about other things for a bit. And then I'm going to circle back around and I'm going to ask, what percentage to quota did you hit? And then I'm going to talk for 20 minutes or 10 minutes. And then I'm going to circle back around and go, I forgot to ask, how much did you sell? Those three should match.
So I want to break this down. So the quota is how much in probably annual bookings they were expected to sell in a given period of time.
We'll use $1 million.
Okay, $1
as
million.
an example.
Then you say, what was your percentage to quota? Meaning as a percentage, how much of that million did they sell? Which they said 75%, so 750K.
Yes.
And then 10 minutes later, when you say, hey, remind me, how much did you sell? You're expecting them to come at you with that 750,000 number.
Yes. Yeah. So a good example of the $1 million, I had somebody who was crushing, like over crushing it. Everything was too perfect. He said $1 million quota. I hit 120% to plan. And then he told me he sold 800,000. And I said, hold on, your numbers don't match. I'm calling BS right now.
Yeah.
He said, what do you mean they don't match? And I said, what is 120% of $1 million? He said 1.2. And I said, what percentage would 800,000 be? And he said 80%. And I said, so you know math, but the math you told me doesn't make any sense. So I call BS. Why don't you walk me through it? And he said, okay, I was pacing 120%. I was at 800,000 and I was laid off. I'm like, cool, lead with that.
Yeah.
Like, be honest. That's okay. It's okay if you missed quota because of a thing.
Yeah.
But tell the truth.
Yeah.
That's the small part of it. But I also want to find out how do they get to this number. So I ask them things like, what is your average deal size? What is your average sales cycle? How many deals do you close in a month? I'm asking a lot of things, not back to back, to see, does the math work?
Yeah.
Because you want to find out, does the math work? Do they understand the math? Even if it's a company, believe it or not, there's companies that don't track any of that. They don't even have a CRM.
Yeah.
Blows me away. But even if nothing's tracked, the salespeople, if they're good, they know.
They know.
They know their numbers.
Yeah.
Inside and out. So even if for whatever reason the company didn't have a quota, which baffles me, but if they didn't, they still had a goal.
Yeah.
They still know what they should be going for, and they know what they sold.
I want to go back to something you said a little bit earlier when you said before you even get to this point, it's all about knowing who you need to hire. And you used an example of saying if you're selling into SMBs, into small businesses with a $500 or $700 a month product, if you hire a rep from Salesforce, it's going to be a bad time, right? So my question is, what are the commonalities that you need to look for? Like, how do you assess your business and a candidate's resume and make sure that they match?
Yeah, this is where I spend most of my time. working with potential or new clients. And I told you this earlier, a lot of potential clients I talk to are not ready to hire, and they don't know that they're not ready to hire, because you first need to understand, what are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to, let's say, for instance, you're trying to buy back your time, but you are a CEO who is the only salesperson who doesn't like running demos, and so you want to hire an SDR, which is an appointment setter, right?
Yeah.
That's not going to buy back your time. First off, it's going to take more of your time to coach and teach that person, because it's probably a junior person. And then you're going to be running more demos, which you don't want to do in the first place. So it's understanding, like, why am I trying to hire somebody? What am I trying to accomplish? And then what is that profile that fits into this role? So if it's SMB, then it should probably be somebody who understands selling SMB. If it's mid, the big difference for the audience is, if you're closing a $300,000 deal, that's going to take you 6, 9, 12 months, and you have to do a lot of multi-threading. You're going to talk to a lot of people. If you're closing an $800 a month deal, it might be a one-call close.
Yeah.
And those are two totally different types of mentalities and the way you think about it. So let's figure out first, have they closed our types of deals, our deal sizes? I know a lot of people want somebody who's sold their thing before. Sometimes if it's a very, very, very niche, that's important. But for the most part, that's not as important. Is, have they sold your size deal, your deal cycle? Have they sold into the space? And maybe have they sold to the type of people that you're selling to?
Interesting.
The other thing is, if it's a founder-led SaaS organization with 10 people, and you have never hired a salesperson before, you don't know what you don't know. And so even if you think your process is great, you need to hire somebody that's already been in that situation, who's already been the first, second, or third salesperson on a team, because they're going to understand, I know I might be going this direction today, but tomorrow I might have to be over here, and I'm good with that.
Yeah.
Whereas that person from Salesforce has an SDR booking the meetings for them. They have somebody building their decks. They have somebody helping them close the deals. They have a sales engineer. They have all those people helping to do the things. When it's your first hire, that's the person doing the things.
Yeah.
And as you get larger, then that changes, right? So for instance, if it's somebody's very first hire, it might be an SDR depending on what they want. It might be an account executive. It might be a sales director. It totally depends on what are they wanting to accomplish and how quick do they want to get there.
That's interesting. You've said something that I want to understand a little bit better. You said, if you're in a founder-led sales organization, which, like most of the clients we work with, at least when we start working with them in the academy, are founder-led sales, and then they eventually they grow their way past that. But you said, if you're a founder-led sales organization, even if you think you have a great playbook, even if your processes are dialed in, it sounds like what you were saying was the processes for a rep will be different than the processes that work for a founder. How
100%
How are they different?
Because the rep's job is to close deals, or whatever you're hiring them for. Let's just assume in this case you're hiring an account executive, a salesperson to close new business. That's their job. The founder's job is to close new business, bring on funding or whatever that is, run the business, do all of the things, spin all of the plates. And so they most likely don't have an amazing pipeline in their CRM, if there is a CRM.
Yeah.
And they most likely, even if they don't realize it, are cherry picking the type of leads that they're taking, because they don't want to waste their time talking to people that they shouldn't be talking to, because they don't have time to do that. And so let's say this founder is spending 2 to 3 hours a day selling. The salesperson is going to spend 8 hours a day selling. And also the process might be in the founder's head. And it's hard to tell somebody what's in your head unless it's already been mapped out. Like Dan teaches, make sure you put everything on video. So you show all of these things.
Yeah.
But the salesperson wants to come in and they want to say, give me the playbook, let me run with it. And if it's not a great playbook, they're going to run into a wall and they're going to wonder why things aren't going. Also, they don't have the founder title. It's a little bit easier if the CEO goes to a conference, does a speaking engagement, and somebody's seen them for the third time, and then he has a meeting with them, or she has a meeting with them, they have more credibility to close the deal than somebody who says, I've been working here for a month.
Yeah.
So
that was what I was going to ask is, historically what we see in the companies we work with is when a founder hires their first 1 or 2 reps, the close rate sometimes drops materially.
Yep.
But it seems like the rep is the one doing this for a living and they're doing it 8 hours a day. And I think a lot of founders don't expect the close rates to be lower. They expect them to be higher. Is it all a credibility thing or are there other factors that go into that?
There's other factors. Usually especially with the clients that we work with most of the time, and those are, as you know, these are the clients I've been working with for 8 years.
Yeah.
Same type. What happens is the salesperson comes in and initially processes maybe aren't as tight as they need to be. So they need to do some heavy lifting and they need to start learning. They need to try, test, adjust over and over and over until they figure it out. And so while they're doing that, their close rate goes down a bit. There's a lot of pressure to have a high close rate.
Yeah.
In the founder, so they don't have that title of founder or CEO or whatever it is one thing. Two, they didn't build it. Like they don't know it inside and out, as they don't have that passion yet.
Yeah.
Where, you talk to some of these founders and you're like, tell me a little bit about what you do. And they're so ecstatic. You want to close them down, but you shouldn't.
Yeah.
And it's going to take a while for the salesperson to get to that point. So what I usually see happen is sales closing average starts to droop down, it tapers here, and then it starts to come back up. And oftentimes, after whatever that amount of time is, depending on the type of sale, the closing average increases. Because now we can figure out what the CEO is doing, we can figure out what that great salesperson's doing, and we can start combining those two things. And then it becomes better. But you're right, I get a lot of times look, we might have had our best month ever, but his closing or her closing average is much lower than mine. And I'm like, but you just had your best month ever. That means they're putting in the reps. It's just going to take a while. Also, you got to think about this. If it's a 5-year-old business, the CEO who's doing the deals has a 5-year-old pipeline. This new AE has a 1-month-old pipeline.
Yeah,
so in 5 years, that person, they're going to be closing higher deals because it just starts coming through.
So what I took from that is there's almost two versions of the sales process. There's the founder sales process when it's the founder actually doing the calls, doing the deals. And there's a few corners you can probably cut there because they could make up for it with they built the product, they know every inch of it, they've got the passion, they've got the track record.
Yep.
And then there's what I would call the repeatable sales process, which is essentially taking the magic from the founder, some of those ingredients, mixing it with the sales professional, and that's what actually lets you scale.
Yes. Yeah, and I would say every now and again I come across a founder who says, Travis, I love selling. I'm really good at this. I have a process where if you hire somebody, it'll be rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
And I do get those. As a matter of fact, I'm working with Run right now where we're hiring. In September, we hired their first salesperson. In February, we hired their second, and now we're hiring their third because the process was already built.
Yeah.
But that takes somebody, that person also had been in sales for 10 years before they started their business.
Sure.
So they kind of already got that.
So let's say you're a founder and you want to make sure that you've got the process set before you start hiring the salespeople. What are the most common blind spots that founders have?
Well, first we have to determine, is this an inbound or outbound machine, right? So are a large amount of people filling out lead forms and saying, hey, I want to talk to you, or doing free trials or whatever that looks like, or do they not know who you are and you're just going after them? So those two things.
So it starts with a marketing channel.
Yeah, it really starts with what that looks like.
Yeah.
And then I've tipped back to the question.
Yeah.
I sidetracked myself.
No, it's all good. It's if you're a founder that wants to have their playbooks dialed in before they hire the reps,
yes.
like what are the blind spots the founder's going to have?
Yeah, I think first off, they don't know what they don't know. So you have to assume that whoever's going to be taking over the playbook isn't going to be doing this 2 hours a day. They're going to be doing it 8 hours a day or however many hours they're working.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Also, you have to assume that they're probably not going to be able to cherry pick as often. Because if this founder is able to close 5 deals a month, and that's okay, but they're expecting the salesperson to close 15 deals a month, it's a totally different motion.
Yeah.
The way to set them up for success is to already have a pipeline ready for them when they start, if possible, right? Whatever that looks like. It could be an inbound pipeline. It could be from everything marketing's done. It could be a win back, which is one of my favorite pipelines. Win back being, this is somebody who you talked to at some point that didn't buy, but maybe had an okay reason for not buying at the time. And most likely those leads have not been touched for years. They're just sitting there.
And you got to go warm them up again.
You got to go warm them up again. Yeah.
So having a pipeline for them, the one that came into my mind that I'd love your opinion on is metrics, because you're big on metrics, you're big on data. And I was sitting here listening to you explain, quota and percentage to quota. And I look at myself and my co-founder in my first company, and we couldn't have answered those questions. You wouldn't have hired us to close a door, man. We wouldn't have passed your first screen. And it wouldn't have been until the sales team was built out that we would have started caring about measuring all of those things and knowing the quotas. And, we were worried about revenue and churn and building the product. So what are the metrics that the founder who's still doing sales, like if they want to start measuring now, so that way they can have a seamless handoff when they hire the team, what are the metrics they need to be looking at?
And that's a great one. You need to know the metrics, because your top salespeople, when they're talking to you, they're going to ask you those questions, and they're going to want to know, how did you come up with my on-target earnings? On-target being salary plus commission. And if you're just throwing a dart or asking a friend, the top salespeople aren't going to work with you anyway. But you need to know the data, and it's pretty simple. Just pull up the reports in your CRM. Look at every single thing that you do, every activity. If there's a dial, you should track every dial that happens. If there's a conversation, you should track every conversation. What you really want to know is, when I get a lead, either coming in or I reach out to somebody, how many things have to happen before I get a close? Like what are the steps, and what's the whole process? And most likely when they start looking at that, they're going to have that aha, oh shit moment, where they realize, this is the thing that's broke. I didn't know this was broke, and now I figured this thing out, which, by the way, is how you also coach those salespeople. Is if you are having your weekly meetings every week and you're walking through the numbers and suddenly something doesn't feel right, you can probably see that it has to do with activity. Some type of activity isn't happening right. But I always say, you have to know your numbers inside and out. You have to know everything about what you're doing. And the easiest way is for the founder just to take, a lot of my top clients will take one of the founders, and they'll literally turn off everything they're doing for 2 to 3 months before they hire. And they're just a sales rep for 2 to 3 months. That's what they're doing over and over. And after about a week, they're like, oh, I see this thing that's broke. We need to fix that before we hire somebody.
So you're saying your best clients will take whichever founder is doing sales and essentially remove all of their other responsibilities as much as they can.
As much as they can,
right? It won't be all of them, of course, and essentially try to scope them into just being a salesperson as much as possible to get them closer to the process so they see all the details.
Yep. And then once they have a process and a system, then all you do is you just record every activity. Like literally anything that you're doing sales related, you should have a camera on you and you should be recording it. So then when somebody says, what does the onboarding look like? Oh, I have your onboarding.
Yeah, it's this.
Here it is.
Deal.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Cool. So when we talk to founders in the academy, one of the most common things we hear is, I want to get out of founder-led sales. I want to exit founder-led sales. I want someone to solve sales for me. And I've got some strong opinions on this topic, but I'm keeping myself for a minute, because I'd love to hear from you. When someone says they want to exit founder-led sales, what is the most common mistake that you think they're getting ready to make?
The number one thing is trying to move out too soon. So this is their business. This is their baby. They built it. They're at 500K ARR. They're at 10 million ARR, whatever it is. They've done that I shouldn't say on their own, with their team, without a sales team. They've done that and they've got there. And what a lot of times is, I'm stressed, I'm fed up, and I know I need to buy back my time and put my energy somewhere else. And I need to do that today.
Yeah.
And so what happens is, they hire a person saying, I need you just to go do all these things. You got it. I trust you. And they don't monitor. They don't help. They step away. Stepping away from being the salesperson isn't the same as not being the sales leader. So a lot of times what they need to do is they need to keep doing the things, they need to keep selling, they need to keep closing, and they need to make sure that the salesperson gets what they're doing and understands it. Okay. And they need to keep doing it until the salesperson is bringing in money so they don't get stressed over here. Once they've got that, then you slowly start to step away. And I think that's the biggest mistake is in my mind, it's time for me to stop selling. And it's okay, by the way, to stop selling if you hire the right people to do it, but you need to make sure that they're doing it.
Yeah. You and I see eye to eye on this. So there's two jobs. There's the selling and there's the leading of the selling, right? There's being the sales leader.
Yep.
Yeah. And so my strong opinion was exactly what you just said. It's that I think founders sometimes will conflate the two things where I need someone to take my sales calls, I need to hire a rep, versus I need to get the hell out of sales entirely and I just don't ever want to deal with it again. And it sure would be great if customers kept showing up, right?
Yeah.
One of them can work, right? The first one can work. I need someone on the phone. I need someone doing the deals.
Yes.
But just because you can stop being a rep as a founder doesn't mean you can stop being a sales leader until you have someone to be the sales leader for you.
Yes. Yeah. And so even if you are thinking, why don't I make my first sales hire a director? They can run the show. That's true, but you still need to teach them how to run the show. You still need to teach them your business and what you're doing.
Yeah.
And you need to remove obstacles and roadblocks out of their way so they can go do the hard work and the heavy lifting and then start hiring the team. Yeah. But if you're going to hire a sales director and it's your first hire, you need to make sure you're hiring somebody that understands that their job is to sell first and lead later. Otherwise, they're going to quit after 3 months when they thought the job was to lead a team that doesn't exist.
Yeah, and this goes back to what you were saying before about matching the deal size and the sales cycle of your company to the person you're trying to hire. Yep. I think there's also another element to that I've done poorly at times, which is matching the size of company that you're hiring
Yes.
from to the size of company you're hiring into. Because a sales director that's got experience at a $2 million annual revenue startup is a vastly different hire than a sales director, same title, at Zillow. Right?
Oh yes.
Yes. It's a totally different game.
When I'm going through the process with new clients, and one of the questions I ask is how many people are in your company, all those things.
Yeah.
If they tell me 10, 15, 20, when I start my Boolean search on LinkedIn, the very first thing I'm doing is I'm checking the box under 50 people in the company.
Yeah.
There's no reason to get somebody that's in those large companies. It's super easy for anybody that's doing their own searches. That's the very first thing you should look for.
Yeah, I think people get enamored with this thought of like, this person's been in this big company, so they can help my company be big too. But they don't realize there's probably 7 different sales director hires between $1 million and $100 million, most likely.
Yeah, there are. Now it's okay to have somebody that's in a big company if they've done it.
Yeah.
So I often see somebody who was a startup specialist and then they graduated these large companies and they're not happy because they're used to having a voice and they're not used to just being another number.
Yeah.
And they don't like it. And usually when you're in the small companies, you can call up the founder and say, hey, I have this idea, and you can talk about it. When you're in the large companies, you have an idea and maybe 3 or 4 years down the road, somebody might consider doing something about it. Yeah. So I love to poach those people when I see that they spent 4 years building this company or these 2 companies out and they've moved here. And I'm guessing they probably aren't as happy as they thought they would be. But the move, I will tell you, from a small company to a large company is easier than from a large company to a small company.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
By far.
By far, yeah, for sure. All right, so you've broached this topic of hiring a sales director. And I think that hiring a rep is still difficult, but more straightforward, right? I think you also have a shorter feedback loop. You can figure out more quickly if they're good or not. The consequence of letting that person go is less. Hiring a sales director, for me at least, is a very high stakes hire. It's one that I would be really disappointed in myself if I get wrong. And I would encourage any founder listening to this, take that hire seriously.
Yeah.
So my question for you, Travis, someone who's hired, how many sales directors have you hired at this point or recruited? Hundreds?
Hundreds, yes.
Okay, so been around the block. How do you evaluate a sales director to make sure that you nail the hire the first time?
We need to circle back to what I said earlier. You first need to know who you want. And you need to know where you're at. So think about this, Matt. If you have 0 salespeople you're looking for a certain type of sales director.
Yeah.
If you have a team of 5 people, you're looking for a certain sales director. And if you have 50 people, you're looking for, these are 3 totally different hires. If it's 50 people, this is a person that is leading. Their job is to come in and lead and make sure the troops are selling. If there's 5 people, they're probably a player coach. They're leading, but they probably are going to have a number that's assigned, whether it's their number or the total number, and they have to make sure that happens, which means they have to be picking up the phones and talking to people.
Yeah.
If you have nobody, you need to find somebody that likes doing this. They like to come in and figure it out from scratch and be a salesperson and do all the hard work and the heavy lifting, get the wins, get the victories, and then build a scalable and repeatable process, and then start bringing a team in, and then teaching them the same thing. Yeah. So there's 3 different really types of people. So you got to figure that out first. Like that's the biggest thing. The mistakes that I see people make is they don't explain to the director what their actual role will be when they start. So you have Betty, let's say, who has been leading at her company a team of 10 salespeople. She started out as the only person. Now there's a team of 10, and she's been leading them for 2 years, and all she's doing is leading. And she's also working with C-level, and she's working with marketing, and she's doing all these things. But you want her to be your first sales hire, and you're not explaining to her what that looks like. She's going to come in and she's going to say, I graduated from this.
Yeah, where's everyone?
This isn't what I signed up for. So you need to kind of understand that, I think is a big thing. And then as far as sales hires, you can ask about their process and their quotas. As sales directors, you need to learn, walk me through how often you're actually in the trenches selling. Walk me through what a week in the life looks like for one of your salespeople.
Oh, that's interesting.
Walk me through your coaching. How often do you touch them? What are you I want to find, and then first let's find out if they're even getting their one-on-ones and if they're even getting their coachings, and then walk me through each person on your team's data and their numbers, and who's your top salesperson and why? Who's your bottom salesperson and why? And I want to see how they think about this. And then you're going to ask the powerful question. If they're managing a team, so you said you have 7 people on your team, 2 people are always over quota, 2 people are always under quota, and there's 3 that seem to sit in the middle. Where do you put most of your time? And by hearing that answer, you start to learn what type of leader they are.
What answer are you looking for in that question?
I'm not looking for them to say I'm spending most of my time in the bottom.
Yeah.
Because you still need to coach the bottom people, but sometimes bottom people are bottom people. And if you spend too much time on them, you're not putting the energy where you should, which is those people in the middle who want to be those top people. So I always say focus on the middle. Most of your time should be spent with those middle people if they have the desire. It's the will versus skill. If they have the will, I'm going to spend my time with them. I'm still going to touch the top reps. I'm still going to work with them because they need it, but I'm working with them in a different way.
Yeah.
I'm just asking, what do you need? I'm not coaching them the way I'm teaching the bottom people. And so that's the next question is, okay, so you're having your one-on-ones. Walk me through what your last one-on-one looked like with your top rep, and then walk me through what your last one-on-one looked like with your bottom rep. And if those are the same, if those are the same, there's a problem with this leader, because you should be you're going to have the basic things you talk about. Sure. How are things going? What can I help you with? What obstacles are you facing? What does your pipeline look like? But then there's this person's getting a lot of coaching, and this person I'm probably giving something to. I'm probably going to let's talk about you running the next sales meeting. Let's talk about that type of thing. Yeah. And this person I'm talking about, I hate to have this conversation with you, but you literally aren't hitting your numbers because you're not working. You just literally you're not picking up the phone. Yeah. Which is a conversation you don't want to have anyway, but you do. So hope that's helpful.
Yeah,
for sure. This could be 3 hours, man.
Yeah, no, I'm picturing, hopefully if you're hiring sales leaders, you just had a pen and a piece of paper out during that one, because those are a lot of really specific, tactical questions with right answers and wrong answers that people should be asking. That was really well done.
They are, and you just need to you really, really need to understand what does their process look like and what does their team's process look like. And then you need to understand if you could change something that's holding you back from doing better, what would that be? Because now you're going to find out, is this somebody who takes responsibility for things, or is this somebody who blames others?
Yeah.
That's a whole nother conversation.
Well, it's a conversation I want to have because one of the things that I've run into in my own companies, but also in founders that I've coached, there's a little bit of this tension, right? Where as a leader, if you have someone who's not performing, you're trying to figure out like, yes, I want to take ownership over it because I'm a leader. And maybe I've built a container that's not setting them up to win. Maybe the pricing is wrong. Maybe the offer is weak, whatever. Or maybe the rep just isn't good, right? And so my question is, how do you tell the difference when you're evaluating someone's performance between, is this a competence and skill issue where this employee simply can't measure up and I need to replace them? Or have I actually built a system that's setting them up to fail, and do I need to go change something with my product or my pricing or my offer or something else that the rep can't influence? How do you tell the difference between those two things?
That's a lot to unwrap. So if you have, let's say two different situations. This is their first salesperson, or this is just somebody on a team?
Let's say it's somebody on a team.
Okay, because it's a little different.
I see where you're going.
Because
right?
if you have somebody on a team, you already have active action points, so you can literally know if you do the average of what everybody is on our team in activity, you should come to this result. So the first thing you can do is look and say, are they even doing the minimum activity that's required? Because it could be that they just aren't putting in the reps somewhere.
Hold on, let me interject for a sec. So what you're saying is, if you have a performance issue and it's your first salesperson, it's more likely that there's a systemic issue that you probably need to solve as the founder. But if you have a sales team and there are other non-founding salespeople who are performing, then your BS threshold should be a little bit different at that point, because there are other people who are already getting the result, and you should be able to reproduce that.
Yeah. So the first thing I'm always looking at is effort.
Yeah.
The will. Are you just putting in the reps, right? That's the first thing. Then I want to figure out, do they care? Like, do they actually give a shit? Is this somebody who's just checking in, and are they fine with what they're doing?
Yeah.
That's a whole nother story. And the other thing, if they're the first salesperson, you should ask them. Like, I mean, when I hired you, Matt, like, you showed me all these success from your last two companies. Walk me through what's holding you back. Like, what's up? And you might learn something you didn't know. They might just tell you the pricing sucks.
Yeah.
Or whatever this thing is broken and we need to fix that thing. Or they might not know the answer, which is a whole different story. If they have no idea what's holding them back, then we need to dig in and figure out what's holding them back. Easiest way to do that is to listen to their calls. Like, 2 months ago, I talked to a founder, and I asked he has one salesperson, and I asked how that person's doing. He said, he's doing pretty good. I said, what is pretty good? And he said, well, he's hitting the numbers I want him to hit, but he's just not getting better. And I said, walk me through your coaching. And he's been with me for about 6 months. We have one-on-ones once a week. When's the last time you listened to one of his calls? I don't know. When's the last time he coached himself on one of his calls? He's like, he's never done that before.
Can you unpack that?
Yeah. So I want every salesperson to be coached on 3 calls every week. Sounds like a lot, but they should do at least 1, if not 2 of them. They should literally listen to their call, and they should score themselves.
Oh, so they listen to their own call and it's self-evaluate.
And it's self-evaluation, because I want to listen to that call, and I want to see, are they right? Did they get where the mistakes are? If I tell you what you need to improve upon, you might think I'm full of crap. You might think I just picked a bad call. But if you tell you what you need to work on, it's different. So this founder, I said, just pick a call and listen to it. He's like, oh my God, that was terrible. He got down to the close, and he said, but it's probably too much money for you, right?
Oh, ouch.
And then he didn't close the deal. And then he coached him. And they listened to the call together, and he improved just like that. Because sometimes you start making mistakes, we all do, and there's nobody there watching us to remind us that we should have taken a right instead of a left.
Yeah.
We just forgot, and sometimes you need that GPS person there to tell you.
That's a beautiful example of what you talked about earlier when we talked about founder-led sales, the difference between having a rep and stepping out of the leadership role, right? Like that's a great example of a job that whoever is in the sales leadership role, in that case the founder, still needs to be doing that has an immediate impact on close rate and revenue.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And let the salesperson pick their calls. Let them pick at least 2 of the calls you're going to coach them on, and you pick one of them, because what if all 3 of those are terrible?
Yeah.
Then but you just picked my worst 3. Let them pick a couple that they want to be coached on. I want them to give me one they want coaching on, and I want them to give me one where they feel like they blew it out of the water and they're impressed and they want you to hear it.
Huh.
Because that might still be a bad call.
Yeah.
It's possible.
That's interesting. I love it. I really love how you're reinforcing the importance of getting the call recorded. And that's something that ideally is done before you even hire a salesperson, right? Like you should start recording your own calls, and then you've got the examples of what good looks like.
100%. What a lot of founders who hire their first salesperson do is they sit on the initial call and they watch and they coach during the call. And although that might help early a couple of times, you're not helping them. You're actually making it worse for them. Coach after the call, after they've had time to absorb it, but not during the call, because maybe they're going a certain direction and you just threw something out there to them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I can tell if I put myself in the shoes of the rep, the difference between like Travis in my Zoom chat telling me what to say real time and I'm just a puppet who's getting my strings pulled, versus me taking a shot, potentially missing, reviewing my own recording, coaching myself, bringing it to you and saying, here's where I think I missed. What else do you see?
Yeah.
Like one of those things makes me better at my job. The other one is just you making me a puppet,
Well, and there's nothing wrong with the puppet early on, right away, just to help them, but you get only a little bit.
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, that's cool. All right. I want to leave this podcast with a very common emotion, I would call it, that I hear from a lot of founders. And I want to know what your response is to it. So I love that you've got the direct experience, the recruiting experience, and the coaching experience, because I think the Venn diagram is, it's not quite a circle, but it's pretty close. One of the things we hear a lot with early stage founders, and I was one of these people, by the way, is I don't like sales. I don't like to sell. I don't want to be salesy, whatever that means, right? What do you say to those founders? Where are they going wrong? What beliefs do they need to crush?
They're probably looking at sales the wrong way. Let's say that you are a founder and you want to bring on funding and you're presenting to a board. You're probably going to exude so much passion and excitement, and you're going to be nervous and you're going to be scared, but you ooze that excitement. That's sales. That is sales.
Yeah.
And so when you talk to a brand new, one of the coaches from SaaS Academy talks to a brand new client who just came on, and they say, tell me what you do. And they get nervous and they get excited and they walk them through, and pretty soon they have that perfect pitch after a while.
Yeah.
That's sales. It's passion about what you do. And what they're saying, what they mean, what they say are 2 different things. I don't like having to talk to people to try to sell them our product. I don't like having to ask for money. I don't like answering objections. That's different than I don't like sales. Because I think if you are customer facing, you are in sales. Anywhere.
Yeah.
Like some people are bad, some people are good, but you're in sales if you talk to somebody at some point, because you're representing your company.
Yeah.
And so I think that the best advice I can give is, when you're thinking, I don't like sales, what is it that I don't like about sales? And let's fix that. Whatever that is. Maybe they don't like it because they hate cold calling. Like they hate cold calling. Yeah. And if you hate cold calling, have you actually tried to work on your marketing department to drive inbound leads? Because maybe you like closing deals.
Yeah.
So it's kind of figuring out, what is it that I don't like? And if you don't like any of it, it's okay. Let's just get somebody in here and teach them how to do it.
Yeah, that's interesting. So your advice to kind of button it up is, when we say sales, it doesn't actually mean anything because it can mean everything. And so instead, what we need to do is break it down into the parts, like the different jobs, and figure out which one is giving you the heartache, and then reverse engineer a solution for that.
Yeah. I spoke with someone last week. It was a candidate screen, and she said, I absolutely hate my job. Like I hate it with a passion. And it took a half an hour to unwrap what it was that she really didn't like about her job. She just knew she was so involved. I'm quitting here and I hate it. But it took quite a bit to figure out what it was that she really didn't like. And once we could figure that out, then I knew what companies not to send her to talk to.
Yeah.
Because they have those same things she doesn't like.
That makes sense.
So.
Cool. So last year you wrote a book, right?
Yes.
You of all people, Outrageous Stories and $1 Billion Lessons. What's your favorite outrageous story from your book?
There's so many. I think I have a couple of stories in there just about crazy, the day-to-day things that I encounter when I talk to candidates that you wouldn't believe. Like you would think that I was making it up. I think one of the stories, and this is pretty crazy, but I had a candidate reach out to me on LinkedIn. One of my posts resonated with them. They were able to find my website. They saw that I had a job that was of interest to them. They reached out to me. We had a couple of conversations. I sent them my Calendly link. They booked a meeting with me. Seems pretty legit. Next day I called. She answers the phone. She's like, who is this? And I said, I'm Travis. We booked a meeting. I don't know who you are or what you're talking about. I'm like, cool. I just emailed you our conversation off of LinkedIn and off of the email. You're making this shit up. And she hung up on, like, this kind of thing happens. I don't know how, but it does. And you just have to, shrug it off.
That's it.
You just move on and be thankful that happened before I screened her and missed that there was something wrong there.
Yeah. Get her into a company or something.
Yeah.
Man, that's wild. Well, Travis, man, you shared a lot of wisdom today. I love the stuff about interviewing and about vetting sales directors and like the different types of one-on-ones. I mean, just the detail from lived experience has been super helpful. For the people listening and watching, where do they go to find out more about Travis, about GSD Coach? Like, where do they go to find you?
Yeah, you just check out my website, gsd-coach.com, or you can just look me up on LinkedIn, Travis Janko. Reaching out to me, I prefer to email me, simply because I probably have like 50 messages on LinkedIn since we've been talking. You know what that's like.
Probably right.
But yeah, you can check out those. Give me a shout if you just want to talk sales.
Cool.
I'm here.
Awesome.
We rap about this stuff all the time.
All the time. And we'll put all the links to everything in the show notes so everyone can find it easily. Travis, my man, thank you so much for your time today. It's a great conversation. I appreciate you.
You got it.
See you, brother.
That was fun.